Hey there, survivors. Thanks for tuning into this story. If you're new here, consider subscribing. It really helps keep these stories coming. And before we start, a big thank you to those supporting the channel with an extra membership, especially the Scouts. I see you, I appreciate you, and I create this for you. Now, let's get started. I didn't plan to end up here. Nobody would. But after everything that happened, after every road I took and every bridge that collapsed behind me, literally and otherwise, this flooded ruin of a town became the only place that made sense. I never saw it coming, but I've stayed alive longer here than anywhere else. My name is Luke Harlan. I used to work for a small marine supply shop just south of Baton Rouge, Louisiana. Boats, motors, life jackets, trolling lines, that kind of thing. Nothing glamorous, but I knew how to navigate swamps, how to use an outboard, and how to fix a hull when it cracked on rebar or driftwood. That's the only reason I'm still here. Not luck, just water and boats. The town I'm holed up in is called Manchac. Technically, it's more of a ghost town these days, even before the outbreak. Half swamp, half waterlogged buildings along a narrow stretch between Lake Maurepas and Lake Pontchartrain. Used to be a fishing village and a train stop back in the day. These days, the buildings lean sideways like drunk skeletons, and the roads vanish under black water. But it's quiet. Too quiet for most. When the virus started, it moved faster through cities than any evacuation plan ever could. Baton Rouge was gone in 3 days. I stayed long enough to watch the National Guard block off Bluebonnet Boulevard with cement barricades and flame-retardant mesh. Then one day they stopped showing up entirely. 1 minute, there were roadblocks and choppers. The next, nothing. Silence filled every street like smoke. I ran with a group at first, 6 of us. We thought we could make it to New Orleans, or at least somewhere rural. Didn't make it. On the I-10, we hit a choke point outside Gonzales. A pile-up, not the kind from accidents. Cars had been stacked into a blockade. Some still running, doors open. We didn't see them until we were too close. The infected came from both sides, slow but steady. Not sprinting or climbing, but enough of them to block every exit. That's where I lost the rest. Abby got pulled under a sedan trying to squeeze through the gap. Jorge got caught trying to hold the line with a crowbar. Me, I took the ditch, slid into a drainage canal, and kept crawling until I hit reeds and mud. I didn't stop moving until I couldn't hear the moaning anymore. That night, I slept in a crawl space under a raised hunting shack off Airline Highway, soaking wet and reeking of engine grease and rot. I didn't cry. I didn't even talk. That was the first night I decided to stay quiet, no matter what. I found Manchac by accident. My boat was an aluminum john boat I stole from the back of a fishing lodge near Sorrento. The battery was half dead, the fuel was old, and I didn't have proper charts. I was just following the canals south, trying to stay clear of roads and cities. Every time I saw a building above water, I checked it. Some were empty, some weren't. One had a woman still breathing, duct taped to a chair. I don't want to talk about what I had to do there. Eventually, I drifted through a half-submerged neighborhood where the street signs barely peeked above the surface. That's when I found the old seafood shack with a sloped tin roof and a boarded-up deck that tilted right into the water. It looked dead, but dead was what I wanted. I tied off and went inside. Mold, fish bones, empty cans, but no infected. No footprints, just silence and the stink of mildew. That was over a year ago. I live here now. I've got rain barrels strung to gutters. A solar panel I pulled off a flooded RV powers a marine radio, and an old 12-volt cooler I use for bait and fish. I catch gar, sometimes catfish. I boil water with a little propane stove I found in a duck blind. My walls are covered in maps I've made with charcoal on cardboard, tracking where the herds pass. Which buildings still stand? Which ones are crawling with the dead? Most days are the same. I wake up with the light. I check the perimeter. Rope lines, makeshift noise traps, floating cans strung across the canal. I paddle between rooftops, looking for anything useful. Sometimes I set bird snares. Sometimes I check the broken RVs near the old levee road for batteries or gas. Everything's slow, deliberate, careful. I don't rush. I don't shout. and I don't go near dry land unless I absolutely have to. The dead don't float well, but they can wade. I've seen some of them step off ledges and just vanish into the water, like they forget it's even there. They'll sink, bubble for a minute, and then drift. Others paddle, weirdly, like they remember how to move but not why. Their fingers claw the water like broken rudders, and their eyes never stop watching, even underwater. I've learned to spot the ripples, the dark patches where they linger below the surface. I've shot a few from a distance, but ammo is low. Noise draws more. That's why I built the gull alarm. I tied a bait bucket to a rope pulley above the front deck. Every time a boat or body stirs the water near my place, the seagulls get excited. They squawk and circle. I trained them with old bait for weeks. Now they act like sentries. When I see them spiral tight and shriek, I know to get low, grab the 12 gauge, and shut up. I haven't seen another living person in months. The last one was a man in a camouflage poncho paddling a makeshift raft made from traffic cones and plywood. I flagged him down once. He didn't stop, just stared as he drifted past, rifle in lap, lips moving like he was talking to himself. I don't blame him. Trust went out the window with electricity and mail. Still I hear things. The wind carries strange sounds over the water, chains clanking, a scream cut short. Once, I heard a church bell ring twice and then nothing. I marked them on the map in red ink. Bell 3, 14. Voices 6, 22. It helps me remember what direction not to go. Yesterday, though, something changed. I found a body face down in the shallows near the old bait shop. Not infected, no wounds, just dead. He wore a neon construction vest and one boot. In his clenched hand was a shortwave radio, still crackling. The signal wasn't strong, but I heard something, repeating. A number station or a distress call maybe. I brought it back, dried it out, and hooked it into my battery setup. It's still humming, static mostly, but every couple hours it spits out coordinates. Same voice, male, flat tone. 28.12 north, 90.63 west. Repeat, 28 point. That's what I've been listening to all night. I marked the location. Somewhere near the edge of the Maurepas swamp. I've never been that far east. It's deeper water, more trees, and fewer places to dock or anchor. But if there's someone broadcasting, someone with power, it might mean help or danger. I spent the morning sealing my boat seams with resin, packing a dry bag with ammo, fish jerky, water, and an extra pair of socks. I haven't left this area in over 5 months, but I can't ignore the signal. Not when it keeps coming back. I don't even know if I'm ready to meet someone again, or fight someone again. Still, the quiet's been thinner lately. The gulls are restless. The water's been warm too long. The dead are floating closer to shore. Something's changed out there. And if I'm going to find out what, if this signal means anything, I'll need to move before the rains come back and flood everything deeper. I left at first light. Didn't wait for breakfast. Didn't light the stove. I just packed the essentials. Dry jerky, 2 canteens of boiled rainwater, my last box of 12 gauge shells, and the solar radio in a sealed tackle box. Everything else stayed behind. The shack would hold for a few days, and anything worth stealing needed arms and skill to get past the traps. I've set lines across the porch, tied tin cans to the upper rafters, even left a fish bucket swinging from a tripwire on the dock. If anyone tried to sneak in, it'd be loud enough to let every corpse for half a mile know someone was home. The boat purred to life, barely. The fuel I siphoned last week was watered down, and I could hear the sputter under the idle. I didn't have the parts to clean the carburetor again, but I couldn't wait another day. I let the rope line go, shoved off, and pointed east. The air was still, and the fog lay low on the water like breath held too long. The sound of the engine bounced off half-drowned houses, and I cursed it every second it ran, but I needed speed until I cleared the old train bridge. It took me the better part of an hour to slip past the sunken gas station where the roof was barely visible above the reeds. The first time I came through here months ago, there were bodies hanging off the gutters, some infected, some not. Someone had tried to hold it as a lookout point. Now it was quiet. No signs of movement, no ropes, no dried limbs. Just water thick with algae and the faint glimmer of something under the surface, like shopping carts or chairs, or worse, I didn't stop to check. The closer I got to the swamp edge, the more I had to cut the motor. It wasn't just about noise anymore. The growth had taken over. Trees leaned over the channel like tired men. Spanish moss dipped low, brushing my shoulders, and the water narrowed until I had to use the paddle. I followed my bearings, dead reckoning between tree clusters and makeshift landmarks. An old billboard frame half sunk, the rusted back end of a tractor sticking out of the mud like a grave marker. At some point around mid-morning, I saw the first of them. A walker standing chest deep in the water, back turned, head cocked sideways like it was listening. It didn't move, just stood there, soaked, skin bloated and peeling like wet paper. I drifted right past it in silence. It didn't react. Either it was truly dead, or too waterlogged to track sound anymore. Either way, I wasn't stopping to find out. I passed 5 more before noon. One had both arms missing and was still clawing at a cypress trunk, leaving a trail of red where its wrists kept scraping the bark. Another had its lower jaw torn off, the tongue lolling like a useless rope of meat. None of them followed. That was the only reason I pushed further. If even one had turned, even one had groaned, I would have pulled back. I took shelter for a while on the skeletal remains of a houseboat wedged between 2 trees. Its upper cabin was still intact, and from the roof I could get a wide view of the area. Nothing but reeds, water, and scattered movement too far to track clearly. I ate some jerky, drank half a canteen, and listened again to the radio. The same voice, same coordinates. No urgency in the tone, no distress, just repetition. I checked the chart I'd sketched out on cardboard, and figured I had 5 or 6 more miles, depending on how direct I could cut through. But direct routes don't work in swamps, not in the best times, and definitely not when half the land has disappeared. I tried to take a straight path, navigating by the sun, but the channels kept winding me off course. I passed through what looked like an abandoned hunting camp, full of tree stands and beer cans and faded trail signs. One stand still had a corpse slumped in it, half a ribcage exposed. He'd tied himself in with paracord, probably died up there from dehydration or injury. Either way, he hadn't fallen, and I wasn't about to disturb him. By the time I found deeper water again, the sky had darkened. Not a storm yet, but close. The clouds in the distance were low and slate-colored. Wind tugged at the trees. The gulls didn't follow me this far in, but I still looked up out of habit. A single buzzard circled once and disappeared behind the tree line. I kept going. My arms burned from paddling. The engine couldn't be trusted in narrow waters, not with so much debris, logs, branches, pieces of homes, all potential death traps for a spinning prop. Eventually, I saw the shack. It matched the position from the coordinates almost exactly. A squat concrete structure, like a hurricane shelter or weather outpost, standing on a raised platform with metal stairs leading to the top. The front door was open, or rather torn off and lying in the water like a broken tooth. That alone put my nerves on edge. I coasted up slowly, tied off to a steel pipe sticking out of the lower landing. I didn't speak, didn't call out, just sat there in the boat for a full minute, watching for any sign of life. The place didn't move. No windows, just a roof vent and the dark gap of the doorway. I climbed the steps, 12 gauge in hand, finger near the guard but not on it. Inside, the floor was dry. That was the first surprise. Someone had sealed the seams with rubber foam and lined the bottom with insulation. On the walls, maps, notes, lists, a portable battery pack hooked into a mounted antenna. The shortwave radio, the same model as the one I'd found, was plugged in and active, but no one was there. I swept the place slowly, corner to corner, found a cot, empty, a bucket toilet, clean, a small stove, cold. Everything was still, too still, like whoever had been there stepped out and never came back. I checked for signs of a fight. No blood, no shell casings, no scattered supplies. Whoever ran this place was tidy, deliberate. I listened to the radio. This time, I heard more. A second transmission, cut short by static. Female voice, clipped, panicked. Station 3 is... Then silence. I rewound the recording. Same cut, same timestamp. It hadn't been playing on loop. It was still broadcasting, live, somewhere. I wanted to stay, wait for whoever ran the place to return. But something didn't sit right. The door hadn't been forced by people. It had rust marks where the hinges bent inward, like something strong, something heavy, had crashed into it. I opened the storage hatch behind the cot. Inside was a sealed case of flares, a flare gun, and a single sheet of paper. "If they find you, don't stay still." That's all it said. I took the flare gun, left the rest. I didn't want to risk the radio being tracked, not if others were listening. I copied the second set of coordinates the signal mentioned, a place near Pass Manchac, where the canal narrows and the old drawbridge still cast shadows at noon. That's where I'm going next. But not tonight. The light's fading, the water's rising, and I heard something earlier, just once, like wood creaking where no tree stood. I locked the shack door from the inside, secured it with the remaining chain. I'm sleeping in the corner, boots on, gun loaded, not because I'm afraid, because I know better. I didn't sleep much, not because I was on edge, I've learned to live with that, but because the wind picked up hard around midnight. It rattled the roof vent, made the shack groan like it had a spine. I sat there with my back to the wall, boots still laced, watching the glow of the radio blink through the darkness. The second voice didn't come back, just the original loop, that steady male tone reciting coordinates like nothing had changed. It was almost calming, in the worst kind of way. By morning, the water had risen nearly 8 inches. I measured it with a rusted yardstick bolted to the landing pipe. That meant the rains had started somewhere upriver, maybe north of Ponchatoula or higher in the basin. When it happens fast like that, it brings more than just water. It brings driftwood, tangled branches, sometimes broken remains of homes swept out of nowhere. And the infected. They don't swim, not really, but they float. And if one gets caught in a current, it can ride straight into you, silent and face up. I waited until full light before I unchained the door. Everything outside was pale and flat, like the sky hadn't decided what color it wanted to be. The boat was still there, bobbing slightly, tangled in water hyacinth. I cleared the prop with a paddle, checked the fuel line again, and loaded the flare gun into the side pouch of my vest. I didn't bother with the radio. I wasn't coming back. Navigating out of that shack's channel was harder than I expected. The water was high enough that some submerged fences and junk cars were now invisible hazards. I bumped more than once into something metal just beneath the surface, heard the scrape echo through the hull like a warning. I kept the engine at idle and paddled most of the way until the open canal came into view. I followed the edge of the cypress wall east, past where the old shrimping camp used to be. You can still see the outlines of their cabins if you know what to look for. Shapes beneath the water. Algae-covered roofs half sunk like rotted teeth. I marked the area on my chart months ago. Do not stop. I never did, and I didn't now. About 2 miles in, the wind shifted. The water's surface changed texture, rippling unnaturally. I knew that pattern. Something large was near. I cut the motor completely and let myself drift, paddle across my knees, gun slung over my back. It wasn't long before I saw it. He was wedged between 2 massive cypress roots, stuck upright in the shallows like a bloated scarecrow. I say he, because the remnants of a sheriff's uniform still clung to him, torn, soaked, and stained to the color of weak coffee. The badge was gone. So were the boots. His legs were jammed in mud that had hardened around him like a brace. His torso heaved faintly with trapped gases. The chest cavity stretched to its limit. The eyes were open. They always are. And they were watching me. At first I thought he was fully stuck, a float carcass like so many others. But as I got within 20 feet, his head jerked. Not fast, not violent, just a sudden tilt toward my movement. His arms followed, rising slow like driftwood pulled by a tether. Then came the sound. A wet, choking growl. Not a scream, not a full groan, just that ragged exhale through shredded throat tissue. It bubbled. That was the worst part. Air and rot mixing into noise. He couldn't move his legs, but his torso strained forward with unnatural effort, like the upper body still remembered how to reach. His arms slapped the surface of the water, trying to drag himself out, to lunge. But the mud held, I didn't shoot. No reason. He wasn't going anywhere. But I couldn't pass him easily either. The channel narrowed right where he was lodged. I'd have to push within 6 feet to get by. Too close. One shift in the boat, one current lurch, and he could fall straight in. Even stuck, his arms were long enough to reach over the rail if I drifted wrong. So I backed off. Drifted into the trees. Looked for another way. The alternate path was barely navigable. An old feeder canal overgrown with hyacinth and choked with floating garbage. I used the paddle to test each foot ahead. Twice I had to duck under low branches, scraping the boat along exposed roots. The mosquitoes were thicker here, no breeze to scatter them. I pulled my hood tight and kept my mouth shut. Every slap of water echoed. I rejoined the main canal further down, circling wide around the infected sheriff. From the distance, I could still hear him struggling, splashing weakly against the roots. Not for me anymore, just moving for the sake of movement, because something in that rotting brain still told him to. The water was darker ahead, deeper. That meant I was close. The drawbridge came into view just past a bend lined with dead trees. It stood like a rusted monument, half lifted, cables slack and covered in moss. The concrete approach on either side had long since crumbled into the water. What remained was the steel frame, casting jagged shadows on the current. I'd seen it from a distance before, but never this close. It looked worse than I remembered. I tied off under the eastern support, where a broken stairway led to a utility platform. From there, I could get a better view and, if needed, snipe anything coming from the roadbed above. The infected don't climb, but they do fall, and a few were up there now, wandering the narrow span with slow, uneven steps. There were 3 of them, 2 in ripped jeans, and 1 in what used to be a nurse's scrub top, now shredded and brown. They didn't see me. Not yet. But the metal they walked on groaned under their weight, and one wrong step would send them crashing down. I waited, counting each one, tracking their position. I needed to get under the bridge and through the far side without drawing attention. I slid back down to the boat, ducked low, and drifted into the shadow of the structure. The current was slow but steady. It pushed me directly beneath them. I watched from below as their legs shuffled across the beams, arms twitching out at nothing. The nurse was the closest. Her foot caught on a twisted wire, and for a second she lurched forward. My grip tightened on the gunstock, but she caught herself, turned slightly, and staggered on. One more footfall, and she disappeared from view. I exhaled slowly and drifted out from under the bridge, hugging the far embankment where collapsed railings jutted from the water like ribs. The air smelled different here, saltier. The lake wasn't far. Ahead was a cluster of cabins on raised platforms, old fishing shacks built above the floodline. Most were wrecked, tilted or half collapsed, but one still stood straight, its roof patched with metal sheeting and its dock mostly intact. A faded red tarp fluttered from the upper deck. That was no accident. Someone had been there, maybe still was. I checked my radio. The same broadcast repeated again. Station 3 is static. The timing matched. The signal strength was stronger now. I was close. I didn't call out. Didn't want to risk it. I tied off below and climbed the deck slowly, shotgun ready. The door was unlocked. Inside, it smelled like bleach and oil. That meant someone had been cleaning recently. No infected, no blood, just the sound of a generator humming faintly from a room in back. Then I saw her. Middle-aged, maybe late 30s, wearing tactical boots and a sweat-soaked jacket tied at the waist. She was crouched over a terminal, headphones in, back to me. Her hair was cropped short, utilitarian. She turned fast when she heard me. No fear in her eyes, just calculation. One hand on a sidearm, the other pausing the recorder. "Don't move," she said. "I'll shoot if you do." "I'm not here to steal," I replied. I followed the broadcast, found the dead man near the bait shop. He had your frequency. She looked me over, eyes stopping on the flare gun in my vest, then the mud on my sleeves, then the folded map in my back pocket. She lowered the pistol, just slightly. "You're not from around here." "No," I answered, and gestured that my hands were clean. "I'm not infected." She gestured. "Then sit. We've got a problem." And now that you're here, you're part of it. I didn't argue. I slid the shotgun off my shoulder, leaned it against the frame, and took the stool slowly, careful to keep my movements measured. She watched every inch of motion, not twitchy, but trained, like someone used to reading body language more than words. I didn't ask her name, and she didn't offer it. The interior of the shack was different from the ruins I'd gotten used to. Everything had a place. Batteries were stored in labeled crates, tools were mounted neatly to a corkboard wall, and someone had scratched weather readings into a chalk square by the window. The hum I'd heard was from a compact gas generator locked inside a vented steel cage bolted to the floor, quiet enough to avoid attention, loud enough to notice when it stopped. I thought I was picking up a ghost station, I said, until I heard the woman's voice cut in. Yours? She shook her head. Not mine. Her name was Baird. Sergeant. Signal Corps. Retired. I took over this relay 2 weeks ago when her signal went silent. Found the shack, like you did, and her radio. She didn't make it. How? Don't know, but I've seen what was left behind. She walked over to a dry box near the corner and lifted the lid. Inside were torn notes, flash drives, and what looked like a military-grade flare with Station 3, read only, written in marker. This was a net, she continued, not just a broadcast. There were at least 5 of them, transmitters spaced across the marsh corridor, relaying low-frequency updates to whoever still knew how to listen. I leaned forward. You're trying to rebuild comms? No, she said plainly. I'm trying to warn people away from something worse. That silence hung between us for a few seconds. I waited, but she didn't fill it. Instead, she walked to the back, returned with a hand-drawn map on waterproof paper. The points were marked with colored grease pencil, red for silent, blue for intermittent, green for active. Only one green dot blinked. This place. The rest, I asked. Gone, either flooded out or overrun. I haven't been able to raise Station 2 since the last surge. That's near the edge of the causeway where the elevation drops. If it's underwater, then the next step is confirming total failure. And the broadcasts? I asked. What are they saying? They're not saying anything anymore, she replied. Just coordinates, repeats, something automated. But they weren't at first. The original messages were instructions, evac routes, safe lanes across open water, supply caches, a couple of warnings too. But then, something shifted. The language became fragmented. The tones got distorted, like they were relaying through something that shouldn't have had access. I looked at the chart again. This isn't a natural collapse, is it? She didn't nod. She didn't need to. I already knew. That's when I realized she hadn't told me her name because it didn't matter. In her world, names didn't hold meaning anymore. Only stations, positions, coordinates. It was easier that way. Safer. I didn't blame her. I don't need you to trust me, she finally said, pulling a pair of battery cells from a pouch and slotting them into the terminal. But I need someone who can move faster than I can. My ankle's messed up. Got caught between deck planks on the dock 4 days ago. Nothing broken, but it's not strong enough to cover distance. You know this area? Well enough to survive in it, I answered. Then I've got a favor to ask. I need eyes on Station 2. Not a full recon, just a visual. If it's gone, we archive it. If it's still standing, we relay. You do that, and I'll give you everything I've got. Maps, fuel, my second radio. You'll have something nobody else in these swamps does. Navigation. I thought it over for less than a minute. I didn't owe her anything, but she was right. If her map was accurate, I'd seen more detail in 5 minutes than I had in a year. And I needed direction. Not because I was lost, but because I was starting to feel like I wasn't going anywhere anymore. Surviving for the sake of it had started to feel hollow. I'll go, I said, at first light. Give me your route plan, and a fallback signal if I get pinned. She nodded once and passed me a laminated note card. On it were handwritten frequencies and coded phrases. Switch to band 26 if you're compromised, she said. Use the term driftwood if the location's hostile. Got it? Got it. I folded the card and slid it inside my vest. She started prepping the flare kit while I took inventory of my gear again. 2 shells short. I'd fired once near Gonzales 6 weeks ago when a boater flagged me down, then tried to climb aboard. The other I used on a bloated floater that got caught in my netline. I stepped outside for air. The sun had burned through the low mist, turning the water flat silver. I could hear frogs in the distance, insects near the tree line. Nothing else. That bothered me more than anything. In swamps, silence always means something's waiting. I slept on the porch with one boot on and my hand across the shotgun's grip. She didn't ask questions. Neither did I. We shared a can of beans and a few dry biscuits she'd baked in a tin pot using scrap heat. They tasted like charcoal and comfort. At sunrise, I left. She handed me the spare flare, pointed me toward the broken tree line, and didn't say goodbye. I didn't look back. The route to Station 2 was a shallow weave between the higher parts of the canal system. I passed the edge of the old pumping station near North Pass, where a grain barge had slammed into the bank years ago. The whole structure leaned like a wrecked giant, vines curling through its rusted frame. I knew better than to stop there. Water's too still, too many blind corners. About a mile in, I came across a snag. A floating bundle of limbs tangled in nylon netting. Not moving, not breathing, but still intact. The skin had taken on a bluish pallor, swollen around the joints like sacks of water. One of the arms was chewed through. Probably a floater dragged into another infected's path. They don't bite each other, at least not often, but they do pile, crush, claw. I pushed past with the paddle, letting the current pull me through a narrow bend marked by the charred remains of a fence. That was the unofficial border of Old Manchac, long since submerged. I was now deeper than I'd ever traveled. Midday, the sun was high, the air thick, and the bugs unbearable. I pulled my sleeves down and tied a cloth across my face to keep from inhaling gnats. Then I saw it. Station 2, or what was left of it. The upper section of the relay tower still stood, its antenna angled awkwardly like it had been twisted mid-storm. The platform was partially collapsed, with broken rungs dangling from the side. The shack was there, built into the base like the others, but the door had been blown out. Not broken, blown. The frame splintered outward, as if something exploded from inside. I tied off and climbed onto the listing platform. The wood creaked underfoot, soaked through in spots. Inside, it was worse. Mold covered half the walls. The desk had been overturned, the equipment smashed. I found a satchel with a faded insignia on the flap. Signal corps. It had been cut open. And then I found her. Slumped against the far wall, half covered in a grey tarp. Skin dried to parchment, face sunken, a sidearm still holstered, untouched. She hadn't fought back. Whatever got in, either hit fast or hit first. I didn't pull the tarp off. I didn't need to. I'd seen enough dead to know the ones who suffered versus the ones who accepted it. I scanned for anything salvageable, a few torn maps, a cracked radio, and a note scratched into the floor with something sharp. Only 2 words, not dead. I left the shack in silence, fired the red flare high above the tree line. One flash, then another, then silence. The reply came 5 minutes later, a single flash from the direction I'd come. She saw it. She knew. I didn't stay at Station 2 long. The place felt wrong, too quiet even for the swamp. There were no frogs, no insects, no gulls overhead. Just heat pressing down through the broken roof and the faint creak of the collapsed tower's metal as it shifted in the wind. Whatever happened there had sucked the life from the surroundings like smoke from a room with no windows. I checked the perimeter once more before leaving, but my mind wasn't focused on salvaging. It was locked on those 2 words carved into the floor. Not dead. That wasn't panic. That wasn't someone scribbling in madness. It was a message left by someone who had time to think. Someone who understood the difference. She didn't write infected. She didn't write undead. She wrote not dead. And that scared me more than anything else I'd seen since the world began drowning in its own rot. The return trip took twice as long. The current had shifted with the incoming tide from the lake, and all the channels I had used on the way in were now pushing against me. I cut the motor to avoid clogging the prop and used the paddle. Each stroke through that thick black water was a fight. My arms burned, my fingers cramped. I kept my eyes on the treetops, watching for the flare location. When I finally saw the red tarp again, barely moving in the dead wind, I didn't relax. I slowed to a crawl and checked the dock for anything out of place. The ladder had been pulled up, just like we'd agreed. That was the sign. It meant she was safe. No compromise. I tapped the hull gently with the end of my paddle and waited. Seconds later, a rope dropped down. I tied the boat off and climbed. She met me at the edge, pistol holstered but hand still on the grip. Not nervous, just precise. She didn't speak until I cleared the deck. "You saw it," she said. "I saw what's left." We went inside. I didn't speak until I was seated again. I told her everything. The structure, the body, the exploded door, the carved message. She didn't interrupt, just nodded once and scribbled notes in a tiny water-damaged notebook. She asked to see the maps I'd found, and I handed them over without hesitation. At this point, I figured we were long past the stage where secrets helped anyone. "Do you think someone killed her?" I asked. "No," she said flatly. "I think something got in. I think it didn't act like the others. And I think it's not the only one." She stood and pulled down a crate I hadn't noticed before, buried behind emergency rations and cloth rolls. Inside were old photos, not family pictures, recon shots, drones, thermal imaging, grayscale prints with timestamp overlays. She laid one out on the table, pointed at a shape I could barely make out. "Here," she said, "near the mouth of the canal at Maurepas. This was taken 10 weeks ago. Something moved through the water, registered a heat signature, but it wasn't alive. Not biologically, at least, not the way we understand it. Crossed a mile of swamp in under 12 minutes. No noise, no footprints, no surface wake, then it disappeared." I stared at the image for a long time. The shape wasn't clear, just a blur, like a smear of heat. But it was enough. Too human to be random, too fast to be mindless. "This thing," I said, "it's not just one walker that got lucky." She shook her head. "There are others, variants maybe, or mutations. Not the running, screaming kind. Worse, the kind that doesn't make noise. The kind that waits, follows, learns the patterns." I didn't like the way she said patterns. I'd lived in this flooded town long enough to know the walkers don't change. They wander, they rot, they drown. That was the comfort. They're predictable. But if some of them weren't, if something else had started to use the flood as cover. "I need you to see something else," she said. She unrolled a second map, newer, cleaner. This one wasn't hand-drawn. It was printed, laminated. It had grid overlays and notes in black pen. Multiple symbols marked along the banks and between abandoned rail lines. "These are the spots where signals were either hijacked or repeated incorrectly," she said. "It doesn't look like much, but if you trace them in order..." She ran her finger along the line. The pattern that emerged was a loop, a slow-moving circuit, spiraling inward toward the center of the flooded area between Manchac and the lake's western edge, right near the levee break. "Something is either following our broadcasts or pushing its own inside them," she said. "I've been trying to triangulate its next move, but now with Station 2 gone, we've lost the eastern node. That puts us at a disadvantage. What happens if it finishes the loop?" "We don't know," she said. "But that spiral path isn't random. It's mapping us, and it's almost done." I stood up, walked over to the window. The sun was lower now, filtered through smoke or mist. I couldn't tell. The water outside had risen another inch. I hadn't even noticed it lapping higher on the dock pilings, but it was rising all the same. "We can't stop it," I said. "Not with what we've got." She didn't argue. That was the scariest part. She just looked at me with a strange mix of exhaustion and resolve. "No," she said, "but we can slow it, distract it, or, if we're lucky, make it think we're still in control." Her plan was simple, but dangerous. Use one of the abandoned pumping stations as a decoy transmitter. Hook a looped broadcast into the backup antenna. Burn fuel to run it for 3 days. Lure the spiral there. Draw attention away from the last working relay. Her shack. "But someone has to set the beacon," I said. She nodded. "And someone has to stay here. Keep the real signal going. We lose both, it wins." I didn't ask what it really was. Neither of us had that answer, but I volunteered before she finished talking. Not out of courage, not out of debt, just because I'd survived this long, and I was starting to realize it meant nothing if I didn't try to make it matter. We packed fast. She gave me a waterproof satchel with the transmitter unit, a pre-programmed signal card, and 2 pouches of field rations. I brought my own shells, the flare gun, and a crowbar from her kit. I took a few of her charcoal biscuits too. She didn't notice, or pretended not to. I left without a goodbye. There wasn't a point. She knew I wouldn't say anything. I knew she wouldn't either. After a certain amount of time out here, gestures like that start to feel staged, borrowed from the world we left behind. You don't wish someone luck anymore. You just hand them what they need and get out of the way. The air was heavier than it had been all week, the kind of stillness you only get before a summer storm. It pressed down on the water, muffling sound, dulling motion. The swamp didn't chirp or buzz. Even the gulls were quiet. I paddled until I was far enough from the station to risk the motor, then turned the key. It coughed twice and caught, vibrating the hull just enough to rattle my nerves. I didn't push it hard, just enough to move me forward. The pumping station sat just south of the flood control levee, a squat, brutalist rectangle of concrete with rusted metal walkways and a partially submerged generator housing that hadn't worked since long before the outbreak. It was built for hurricanes, not humans. They used to route excess lake water through it into overflow canals during the rainy season. Now it sat idle, leaning at a slight angle, with vines climbing its side and faded graffiti bleeding down the outer walls. I'd seen it once before from a distance and made a mental note never to go near it. Too open, too many blind spots. The upper floor was accessible by a steel ladder bolted to the retaining wall, but the bottom had likely collapsed into the water, dragging most of the ground-level structure down with it. From the look of the roofline, at least part of the interior was still dry. That was all I needed. I tied off to a piece of twisted rebar, slung the satchel over my shoulder, and climbed. Every step of the ladder groaned like it might let go, but it held. At the top, I took a moment to scan the tree line. No movement, no shadows, no sound. I crossed the narrow catwalk, ducked under a hanging cable, and pushed open a rusted door that whined like a dying animal. The inside smelled like wet paper and rusted iron. Puddles shimmered in the corners of the floor, catching light from a hole in the roof. There were broken chairs, scorched panels, a collapsed filing cabinet with mold curling up its sides. In the back, an electrical cabinet still stood, open, mostly intact, its wiring corroded, but not completely severed. I pried it open and got to work. The transmitter unit was battery-powered, with just enough juice to operate on a loop. I wired it directly to the board's upper rail, twisted the antenna leads through a drainage pipe toward the roof, and set the signal card. The light blinked green, then blue, then red. The pattern repeated, slow and rhythmic, sending out its bait signal to anything in range. If something had been tracking us, mapping the spiral through interference and misdirection. This was the last note in the melody. I locked the cabinet, stepped back, and waited. I gave it 30 minutes before I moved again. Long enough to be sure the broadcast was functioning, not long enough to be caught in the open when things started listening. I didn't eat. I didn't drink. Just watched the water from the window and counted the seconds between gusts of wind. It was getting darker now. Not from the sun, just the air itself. A grayness creeping in from the edges of the swamp like fog, but thicker, weightier. I packed up, slung the shotgun, and climbed back out. The ladder trembled. My foot slipped once. When I hit the walkway again, I froze. Something wasn't right. The air didn't just feel heavy, it felt wrong. Thick with moisture, yes, but also with that pressure you get when you're being watched. I scanned the canal. No movement, no floating corpses. But the water had changed color. It had gone darker. Oil slicked almost, like something was disturbing it far below. I didn't hesitate. I turned and ran the catwalk, ignoring the creaks, gripping the rail as I jumped the gap where a section had collapsed into the water below. I hit the ladder hard, slid most of the way down, and untied the boat with trembling hands. I pushed off with the paddle and drifted, motor off, silent. My eyes didn't leave the station roof. If something had followed me, It would show itself now. 10 minutes passed. Nothing. Then, just as I was rounding the bend to disappear from view, I saw it. A shape emerged from the water beneath the walkway, not climbing, rising, slowly, as if it wasn't swimming, but levitating up through the surface. It wasn't bloated, it wasn't dragging. It was still, controlled, limbs outstretched in perfect balance. Its head tilted slightly toward the walkway, and it waited, not reacting to movement, not scanning for sound, just waiting. And then it turned, slowly, deliberately, and sank again without a ripple. I didn't move for a full minute. My breath slowed without me realizing it. My hands tightened on the paddle, knuckles white. I drifted past a half-sunk billboard with an old tourism ad still clinging to the frame. See the wild beauty of Louisiana's wetlands. I laughed once, quietly. No humor in it, just release. The journey back was a blur. I barely remember the trees. I don't recall the stops or the route. I only remember the water, how flat it looked, and how suddenly I could see depth in it where I hadn't before. Not physical depth, intent. Something was moving under the surface, and it was no longer random. When I reached the station again, her shack was dark. No lights, no generator hum. My stomach knotted. I tied off fast and moved low across the dock. No signs of a struggle. Nothing overturned. I crept to the door, eased it open. She was gone. The interior was intact, maps in place, the terminal still powered down, flare case unopened. But her bag was missing, and the cot had been stripped. A note sat on the table, written in block letters with a grease pencil. They're adapting. I heard them speaking. Not words, but speech, intention, pattern. I'm going south. Don't follow. Change your frequency. Stay moving. You were right to be quiet. I folded the note and slipped it into my vest. Then I turned off the generator, powered down the terminal, and packed my things. I didn't wait for nightfall. I left as soon as I could. The decoy beacon would run for a few more days, maybe more if the station stayed dry. It might buy time, or it might accelerate whatever was coming. I didn't head west. I didn't head east. I drifted north, back into the grayer parts of the flood, back to the areas where no one had walked since the water first swallowed the land. I returned to my old shack eventually. The gulls were still there, the traps still held, but the water had risen enough that part of the dock was underwater. I knew I couldn't stay long. Now, each night, I record what I hear. Not just the sounds from the trees, but the way the water shifts, the way the silence behaves. And sometimes, I hear something behind that silence, just under the surface of the radio hiss. A low, fragmented rhythm, like breathing, or maybe speech. I stay quiet, always. I don't answer calls. I don't respond to signals. If someone tries to find me, I move before they arrive. If something makes noise near the shack, I don't look out the window. I wait, because I've seen what follows the sound. I don't know how long I'll survive like this. The flood keeps rising. The world keeps rotting. But for now, I've learned one thing, more important than food, or ammo, or shelter. Stay quiet, because it's listening.